Hello, everybody. This is Cynthia Kane, and welcome back to UL100ZB, Research Skills, Information, and Technology. We are now ready for our second week and for our second module, which is going to be covering our chapters from our textbook of Plan and Gather. In this video tutorial, I'm going to show you some tips and techniques for planning your research more effectively. And as we start in with our second video tutorial, this is going to feed into our second learning assessment that you'll have an opportunity to complete, which is called the Research Plan. So Plan is another chapter in our Information Literacy User's Guide textbook. It is the third pillar of information literacy, and it basically means developing strategies for locating information and data. So by the time you finish this week's module, you're going to understand and know and recognize different searching techniques for different databases or other types of search engines, different tools that are appropriate to use according to the topic that you happen to be researching, effective search strategies, and also learn about subject terms. I'm going to be covering that in a few minutes as well. You will be able to select good tools for planning your research more effectively, develop and phrase search strategies, and utilize the best terms and techniques when you're searching for articles, for books, for websites, any type of item that's going to help you in your research. Also, we're going to show you how to be willing to find those tools, and in particular, how to revise search strategies and subject terms as needed. And we'll be covering that in a few minutes as well. So a very significant part of Plan, and we talked about this a little bit in our first week as well, is thinking about your topic beforehand. You might remember that I covered aspects of perspectives of a topic, the sources that will help you formulate those particular perspectives, and the resources that will help you locate and find those sources of information. So you also want to think about some different ways that your topic might appear in a particular resource. This is going to make a little bit more sense in just a bit. So selecting search tools. One tool that you're going to hear us talk about during this course, and you probably have heard some of your professors talk about this as well, is something called a database. Now, believe it or not, you probably have already used databases to find articles for particular topics without even realizing that they were actually called databases in the first place. That's kind of a library-centric term. A database can be the full text of many articles. A database can also be a library catalog that will help you identify items such as books that are owned by a particular library. Most databases, with the exception of library catalogs, are usually available through libraries that pay for subscriptions. Now, this is something that I think a lot of people don't even have an opportunity to think about. But basically, just about every database that you access through our library, some may sound familiar, such as Academic Search Complete, PsycInfo, other types of resources. A library actually pays a fairly significant cost per year for access to those resources, which will also include the full text of many articles. Now, why would that be crucial? Information can be a commodity. Information can be free, and valued information can be free. But just as important, information sometimes that a library pays for, such as articles that are available through a database, might be considered to be a little bit more reliable. Now, that doesn't just mean because we're actually paying for it. When I say information is a commodity, it means that you have a much better chance of knowing that information, such as articles within a library database, have been reviewed, they have been vetted, they have been screened for reliability. And that might be as opposed to a website that anybody might create with any kind of information, but you don't really know whether that information is actually accurate or not. So in a nutshell, this is why your professors will encourage you to check out and take a look at the most appropriate subject-specific, discipline-specific databases for your particular topic that are available through your library. So a database will enable the user to search by keywords or by subject terms for references to items such as books, articles, book chapters, dissertations. Many databases, not all, but many, will offer the full text in HTML or in PDF of articles or other items. Now there is a kicker here. Unless a database is absolutely guaranteed to be 100% full text, you may not have the complete full text of every single item within that database. Now that can get a little bit confusing and frustrating. We're going to be going over that in a little bit as well, because it's also important with research skills, information, and technology to know how to access information regardless of how it is coming to you, and also not to get frustrated just because you're not finding something immediately. Also, many databases will offer something called citation tools, and you may have already used these. A citation tool within a database might be a little button or a link that says cite. That actually will convert a reference in a database to a citation in a preferred citation style, such as APA for the American Psychological Association, MLA, which is the Modern Language Association. There are others that are out there as well called Chicago Manual of Style or American Sociological Association. When in doubt, check with your professor to see what citation style they would want you to use if you are writing a paper or creating a project. They may well have a preferred citation style. Now, something we're going to see in a bit though too is that these citation tools are not 100% accurate. And so you must always proofread anything that you find. Again, this is part of information literacy, knowing how to find information, but also knowing how to check for inaccuracies and then correcting them as you go along. There are other search tools that are out there as well, and some of you may be familiar with something called Google Scholar. Google Scholar is a freely accessible web search engine, and it indexes the full text or something called the metadata, which might be the article title, it might be the author's name, it might be the title of the periodical or journal, but it indexes the full text or the metadata of scholarly literature across a number of publishing formats and disciplines. It does allow the user to search for digital or physical copies of articles, whether they are online or located in libraries. Now, here's the thing about Google Scholar. We're going to do a comparison search in just a second so you can see some of the differences in terms of planning your search. Google Scholar is free, and sometimes with free, you get exactly what you pay for. Now, what does that mean? It means with Google Scholar, you may have access freely online to the HTML or to the PDF of an article within Google Scholar if that has indeed been uploaded by someone such as the author of the article. And many authors will go ahead and upload their articles freely online because they want other people to access that information as well. However, just as common with Google Scholar is that you can hit something called a paywall. And a paywall can happen when you are looking in Google Scholar and you find a reference and an abstract or a summary of an article and you think, this looks really good, I want to use this for my research. You click on the link and you suddenly are taken to a publisher's website, which might be the publisher of the journal. And that publisher's website may say, yes, you can have the PDF of this article if you pay $25, $30, $50, whatever they might be charging. That is the kicker with Google Scholar because it is free. This is also why we strongly encourage you to use our library databases when you are planning your search for information. Because remember, I said that the library is actually paying a subscription per year for a lot of our library databases. That means we've already paid for that access. And because we've already paid for that access, you in turn have free access to our databases because you are an Emporia State University student. When it comes to information as a commodity, it is very important to remember those distinctions, and that can often affect the way that we plan our search and what we find for information. So let's do some comparisons here. We are now going to go into the library's webpage, and we're going to try some searches. So when you're in the library's webpage, and you can link to this through Canvas as well, you'll see several tabs running across the page: Discovery Search, Databases, journals, research guides, and free access to digital magazines through a service that we have called Flipster. Now, the discovery search and databases will be where we are going to focus, and then we're going to go back and we're going to look at some other ways of refining our search a little bit more. The discovery search is actually our library catalog. So if you've ever searched an online library catalog to try to find books and other sources that are owned by a library, you already know how to do this. Our discovery search is just a little bit different, and I'm going to show you what I mean. You might remember that I've been doing some searching on electronic cigarettes. So we're going to do electronic cigarettes. You might remember the word "and" that we talked about during our first week's module, which will let me search for something and something else in my search for information. Let's do electronic cigarettes and health. We will click on search. Now, part of becoming an information literate student is knowing how different searches work in different libraries. And a discovery search is actually an extra layer over a library catalog. This is why I got over 140,000 results. I'm a little bit overwhelmed by this information, but the reason this happened is that a discovery search within our library is searching much, much more than just books that are available through William Allen White Library. It's actually also pulling in the full text of articles from a lot of different databases. Now, this can be good or bad when it comes to creating a plan for research, because part of knowing how to plan accordingly is anticipating and knowing how different search tools operate and how you can make them work for you. So now you know. The discovery search is good for discovering information, not so great if I'm just looking for a specific item. I'm going to have to figure out how I can narrow this down a little bit more. So over here, I have some limits that I can apply to my search. I want to see what exactly our library has, or what it has access to. A discovery search, again, is going to discover everything that's out there, but it may not be immediately accessible through that specific library. Now I would like to see if our library actually owns any books. And when I limit it to ESU Has It and print books only, notice I went all the way down to 23 results. So I really did limit that search. Now what we see in here is that in this particular search for electronic cigarettes and health, we have actually quite a few government documents. Now, government documents can also be very handy for information. It looks as if some of these are hearings before Congress, such as record number 1, Aggressive E-Cigarette Marketing and Potential Consequences for Youth. That is a document that we do have on deck 3 of our library. That's a rather odd number for it, but that's the number that identifies the document, and it is available. So that's how I made the discovery search work for me, to try to find some resources that were pretty readily available. So we have quite a few more here. And as we scroll down, we still have some more government documents. And if we go to the next page, you can see that we're starting to get a little bit less specific when it comes to our information. So generally, the way that a database will work, and a discovery search is no exception to the rule, the most relevant results, you see up here how I can sort by relevance, the most relevant results will appear first in that search for information. Well, that was an okay search, but now I really would like to find something a little bit more specific on my topic. So I'm going to click back on this ESU link, and that's going to open another tab back to the library's webpage. Now let's go to databases. So thinking again about planning my search, I might have to do a paper on different arguments for and against the use of electronic cigarettes, health-related issues, and so forth. Now I've really got to think, what kind of information can I find? How am I going to be able to find it effectively? Do I have access to that information? Well, one way you can do this is in a library's webpage. It doesn't matter which library that you're at. You can see if there's a way of sorting different databases by different topics or different subjects, and we do offer this. So I went to that databases tab, and now I'm looking under all subjects. Well, these are all of our different databases, 166 in all, but now these are reorganized by subject area. So you might recall that I was sort of interested in health-related issues. Let's go to medicine and health. And when I do this, a number of suggested databases will now pop up here on the screen that will give me some ideas. Now, often what I will do is look at the descriptions underneath different database names, so that's going to tell me a little bit more what the database is about and what is included. So I highlighted this one called Health Source Nursing Academic Edition. And it looks like it provides over 500 scholarly full-text journals focusing upon many medical disciplines. It's focusing a little bit upon nursing and allied health, but that might be a good possibility for me to take a look at. So we're going to click on this link. I'm going to stop here for just a second. I am searching here on the ESU campus, and because I am, I was taken immediately into the database. Part of planning your search is thinking about access to information regardless of your location. So if you are searching off campus, when you click on the name of a particular database, you actually will be prompted, if you are off campus, to enter your ESU BuzzIn username and password. That will authenticate you as an Emporia State University student. Again, keeping in mind, access to information. Because the library is paying for these databases, and ultimately the university, our databases are indeed limited off campus to people who are affiliated with Emporia State University, and that's pretty typical of most libraries. So again, think about that when you're planning your research accordingly. Who has access to this information? How can I get access to it? We're going to go to something called an advanced search, because something that I want to show you is actually referring to our first module, but then we're going to try some other ways of searching as well. I'm going to do something called limiting my search to my key words. So my key words, which we talked about during our first module, will be electronic cigarettes, health. I might actually find some other terms that I would want to search, such as e-cigarettes, vaping. Remember, you always have alternative terms because the first may not work. So let's just start typing in electronic cigarettes. There's electronic cigarettes and health. And notice I'm getting suggested terms that I could actually add to my search. I could do health care, health promotion, health literacy, but we're just going to leave it like this for right now. Planning a search again. Part of this module is looking at different limits that you can add to your search within a database. So for example, you may have a professor who says that they only want you to find scholarly or peer-reviewed journal articles. Most databases will offer a limit called peer-reviewed or scholarly, and we're going to limit to this. If you only wanted articles that are available full text within this specific database, you could limit to full text. However, I'm going to caution you on that, because there's a good chance that you might find a record or a reference to an article within a database that's not immediately available in that database in full text, but it might be available somewhere else. It might be available in another library database. And that's also part of planning your search effectively. So we're going to limit to scholarly peer-reviewed journals. We're going to go back up here, and we're going to click on search. And I have 234 references, which is actually not a bad search. And notice with some of these, we do have indeed the PDF full text, but we're going to look at something else in just a second as well. So often I like to look at the titles of the articles. And remember I told you that you might eliminate some that would be potentially useful if I only limited to full text. Record number 3 is an excellent example. E-cigarette marketing and communication. How e-cigarette companies market e-cigarettes and the public engages with e-cigarette information. It doesn't look like the full text is available in this specific database, but I could check with the journal title, and I could see if our library actually had access to this article, maybe through another database or maybe even in print. If I did not have access to it in any other way, then I could do an interlibrary loan request for this article. But again, remember, you don't want to rule out things that look potentially useful. So there are some interesting ones here. I could limit a little bit more. So let's take a look at record number 7, which is called e-cigarettes, comparing the possible risks of increasing smoking initiation with the potential benefits of increasing smoking cessation. That kind of relates to something I'm very interested in. So often what I will do, again, this has to do with planning a search. Often I will read the abstract of an article. See those words that are highlighted? Those are the keywords that I put into my search, and they were found within the abstract of the article. So that's kind of a reminder. But as I read this, it looks like vaping might be another keyword that I could put in. E-cigarettes, I could search by that. I didn't search by smoking cessation, which is actually a health-related term for quitting smoking, but I could put that in as a keyword search as well. Let's go back up here. So notice up here, we have something called author-supplied keywords. These are actually words that the author identified and highlighted as potential keywords that relate to that specific topic. Notice also that I have some links here. This again has to do with planning one's search. If I wanted to find other articles from this source or from this journal, Nicotine and Tobacco Research, I could click on that link and that would lead me to other articles from that specific journal. If I wanted to find articles that had to do just with smoking cessation, I could click on that as well. Let's go back to our result list. And let's find another one here. I'm going to go back up. I'm going to go to my first one. Now this record is going to look a little bit different. We do have the PDF full text, so I could click on that text and I could read it or I could save it. But something else that I want you to be prepared for is the idea of subjects or subject terms. Now, subject terms are actually a little bit different from keywords. Subject terms are actually terms that have been established within a database as primary terms for different records or different articles. What does that mean? It means that if I clicked on the subject term for electronic cigarettes, I now have 932 results. But unlike a keyword search, every single one of those 932 results have been identified and indexed as appearing underneath and within that primary subject term of electronic cigarettes. And notice this looks a little bit different. Electronic cigarettes is now in double quotation marks. And now I have an odd little label here that says DE. DE is a label that stands for descriptor, which also means a subject term. So what does that mean for you? It means that when you're searching within a database, find a record for an article or for a book that looks really good and really helpful, and see if you can find any subject terms, just like we found with this previous record, that look as if they would match more specifically to the terms or to your topic that you're searching for. And those are generally hyperlinked. And if you click on those within the database, you're going to get very focused results that have been indexed specifically under that subject term. I'm a huge believer in doing that when I am planning my search for information. Just take some time to do that. So what I just explained to you is actually the second bullet point that is called controlled vocabulary. Controlled vocabulary can be subject terms, they can be subject headings, they can be descriptors, a set group of terms chosen by an indexer for a database or a search engine, and they can lead to more precise searching, especially for broad general topics. I'm going to return now to our search, and I'm going to show you a second way of refining a search in a database or a search engine, and it's something that's called truncation. Truncation simply means that I'm searching for the root of a word and whatever follows, and I usually put an asterisk at the end of that word. This is going to make a little bit more sense in just a second. Let's go back to our search. And there's my original search with electronic cigarettes and health. Let's change this though. Let's do electronic cigarettes and there's smoking cessation. Again, I'm searching within the abstract. We're going to limit to abstract one more time. And now I'm going to do that particular search technique called truncation. So you'll notice I typed the word effect, E-F-F-E-C-T, and I put an asterisk on the end. That is the symbol for truncation. So in this particular case, I want the word effect, but I also want the word effects, perhaps effectiveness, all the variant endings of that root word. You don't have to do this with every single search, but I think it's a really good idea to know that you can do this in most databases, and usually the asterisk will be the symbol for that. So let's search again. That's a little bit of a better search. I took that search down to 44 results. Now, in reality, there's really no magic number of the number of search results that work when you're planning a search. It's whatever is manageable for you. But you don't want just a few, but you also don't want so many that you feel totally overwhelmed by information. So you notice I'm getting actually some pretty good ones here. And again, if I went into record number 2, remember I could still look under the subject terms. This is my controlled vocabulary under subjects. I could click on electronic cigarettes again and only search for articles or records that are indexed under that subject term, but I could also do smoking cessation. It looks like nicotine addiction treatment would also be another controlled vocabulary or subject term. So play with all of these different ideas when you are searching for information. This will really help broaden your search a little bit more. I want to show you one more way of searching for information. And we talked about this a little bit in our first module. I'm going to search again for electronic cigarettes. But you might remember that I mentioned in our first module that we can use the word or, and or. You also might remember that I said I usually don't use the word not because I can eliminate results that actually would work for my search. So this time I'm going to search for electronic cigarettes, but you notice on the second line, I opened a parentheses and I said I want smoking cessation or quitting smoking. When I talk about variant terms, this is what I'm talking about, coming up with different synonyms for different terms. So I want information about electronic cigarettes, but I want that either with smoking cessation or quitting smoking. If I use parentheses, this is going to actually force the database to search for smoking cessation or quitting smoking first in my search for information. It will take that result, that set of results, and it will combine that with the and for electronic cigarettes. And when I searched this time, now I went to 107. But now I have results that might cover smoking cessation or quitting smoking. So the word or can broaden your search. Again, you don't have to do these techniques in every single search, but when you are planning a search for information, it is an excellent idea to have these tools ready to use and know that you can use them in a number of databases as you just start working with your different terms, working with your different results, and seeing what you get. So let's go back. Thank you for watching this first video tutorial. You are now ready to move on to the second video tutorial, Gather.